and we have all gathered here for the premiere launch of the book, A History of the Indian University System by Dr. Surja Datta. It's a very special book launch for us as the author, Dr. Surja Datta, has come all the way from United Kingdom to India to launch his book, which caters to the nature and evolution of the Indian university system. We are thankful to our audience for their presence and our esteemed panelists, Professor Amit De and Professor Chittabrata Palit. We welcome you on board, sir, who have taken time out for their busy schedule and have joined us in our humble endeavor this evening. Thank you, sir. So without further ado, I shall request our author and panelists to unveil the book, but prior to that, I would like to read a synopsis on what the book is all about. This book provides an explanation of the nature of the Indian university system, including its specificities and its peculiarities, as well as exploring how they developed. It offers a historical and institutional perspective by singling out the forces that have shaped the present Indian higher education system. Bridging the pre-independence and the post-independence eras, the book illustrates the continuities as well as the differences between the two epochs. It makes a compelling case for the idea that history matters, and an understanding of India's history is crucial to understanding the present-day Indian university scene. Using multiple paradigmatic case studies based on the University of Calcutta, the Indian Institute of Science, and the Indian Statistical Institute, the book highlights the dominant ideologies and interests that have shaped the university system since its inception in 1857. It will be of great importance to students and scholars of history and education, particularly those with an interest in the history of India and its education system. So this is about the book in a synopsis of the book. I would now request our esteemed panelists to unwrap and unveil the books so that our friends from audience and media can take the pictures. A louder clap, round of applause, please. Thank you, sir. I would now request Dr. Datta to say a few words, but I would like to introduce you officially in front of our audience about your credentials and your works. Surja Datta received his doctorate from Bristol Business School, UK. Dr. Datta also holds an MBA from Strathclyde University and an MA in Applied Social Research from the University of West of England. Currently working as senior lecturer in the Business School of Oxford Brookes University, Surja Datta leads the Global Strategy and Innovation core module in the university's global MBA program, which is ranked 9th in the world, QS Distance Online MBA Rankings 2016. Dr. Datta's research interests include innovation and institutional history. His latest research project is on the Bengal Renaissance, provisionally titled Understanding the Bengal Renaissance Innovation, Networks and Culture, to be published by Anthem Press. So, Dr. Datta, over to you. You can either... Okay, sure.
Thank you, Nilanjana. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming. Today, there was a direct contest between Mamata Banerjee and me in terms of who can attract the bigger crowd, and I'm sorry to report that Didi won that battle convincingly. Nevertheless, this is a special evening for me. Not only I have two historians of great repute to comment on my book, but I also have my parents, my brother, relatives and friends here. This also gives gives me the opportunity to thank my parents and acknowledge their contributions. Something I must admit I have not done sufficiently in the past. I picked up my habit of reading from my mother, which is a plus if you're trying to be an academic. And my father encouraged me constantly during the writing of this book, which has taken over 4 years to finish. I will make my opening remarks. I'll make some opening remarks, but I will keep my speech brief for two reasons. First, I do not want to bore you with a lengthy account of the history of the Indian university system. I'm sure for most of you this is not your idea of having a good time on a Friday evening, particularly considering that we are currently located in Park Street. Second, I'm more interested in hearing what my learned friends here have to say about my book, and I'm really looking forward to listening to their comments. I will speak in English as the book is written in that language, and I'm sure Calcutta being the cosmopolitan city that it is, there would be some in the audience who do not speak or understand the local vernacular. However, please feel free to ask questions in Bengali or Hindi during the Q&A. That is not a problem at all. I am not a historian, so in the presence of two bona fide historians, I feel almost like an interloper. Perhaps I should spend a few minutes at the onset to explain how I came to write this book, which takes a historical approach to answer its research questions. My research originally focused on the role that universities play in a country's innovation system. I don't think that it is controversial to state that research in Indian universities is normally accorded a low priority. This is not to say that the Indian university system does not have brilliant academics. Of course it does. There are many such academics, including today's two discussants. But their brilliance, in my opinion, is mainly due to their individual effort and perseverance. They have succeeded despite the system and not because of it. The defining characteristic of the Indian university system is in fact its orientation towards examination, which dominates teaching and research. Initially I assumed that there will be a book out there which explains why this is the case, why universities are not, by and large, research active, and why there are so few university-industry linkages. I was really surprised to find that such a book does not exist. It was also apparent to me quite early in the process of writing the book that any explanation of the nature of the current university system must span both the colonial and the post-colonial periods. As I show in the book, the roots of the present system stretch deep into the past, to the very beginning of the colonial period in India. India has, of course, a rich tradition of higher learning which predates the colonial period by a considerable period of time. India had centers of higher learning like those in Nalanda and Takshila that existed from 5th century BC to 1200 AD. But these institutions of higher learning were not the modern universities that we know of. Origins of modern university can be traced back to University of Bologna, established in 11th century, and Sorbonne, or more commonly known as University of Paris, and University of Oxford in the 12th century. These early universities were teaching institutions. That the idea that the faculty should engage in research was an alien one at this point in time. It was in Germany in the 19th century there emerged a consensus that teaching and research form an integral part of the university, often referred to as the Humboldtian model, acknowledging the influence of William von Humboldt, the Prussian philosopher and government minister. This university model quickly spread across Europe and in the United States. By the mid-19th century, when the anglicized Indian university system was established, there were essentially two established models in Europe and North America: the teaching university model pursued by Oxford and Cambridge, and the Humboldtian model adopted by University of Berlin, where it originated from, and the so-called red bricks universities in England. Universities like University of Manchester, Leeds University, Liverpool University. So the obvious question here is that when the colonial government decided to establish a university system in India in 1857, which model did they opt for? And the answer is neither. The model they chose was an outlier in Britain, or as Carl Pearson, a professor in UCL, commented, to term it as a university is a perversion of language. The model in question, of course, is the one adopted by the University of London, which during a particular period of time, between 1830 and 1900, of its existence did nothing except examine students. It is important to note that the British themselves regarded the University of London as an aberration, an oddity which is not to be replicated elsewhere in Britain. How this much ridiculed model became the template for the Indian university system is a question that has been answered in the book. But briefly, the reason behind the decision was quite straightforward. It is inexpensive to run the examining university. That is, a university that only examines but does not carry out any teaching or research. To understand the logic of the original university model in India, one must first appreciate the fact that everything that the British did in relation to higher education and learning in India was linked to the colonial enterprise that they were running in the country. Along with the judiciary, the police and the army, the university system constituted the institutional apparatus that sustained the colonial state. The higher echelons of the colonial bureaucracy, the viceroy, the members of the executive council, for example, were educated in universities of Oxford and Cambridge. What was lacking in the mid-19th century was an education system that produces human resource to populate the lower strata of the colonial machinery. The university system was designed to produce clerks for the writers' building, and in this the project was immensely successful. This is not to say that the university system was not reformed during the colonial era. Important changes were brought about, but mainly through local Indians who over time started occupying position of power within the university administration. Foremost amongst these Indians was Ashutosh Mukherjee, who became the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University in 1906. It was Mukherjee who was instrumental in institutionalizing postgraduate teaching and research in Calcutta University. Another educational innovation of Mukherjee was to secure endowments from rich natives on an unprecedented scale to fund research in Calcutta University. The endowments of Taraknath Palit and Rajbihari Ghosh made during Mukherjee's tenure as the Vice Chancellor were so generous that they have been unsurpassed since then. These donations helped to build the University College of Science and Technology, colloquially known as Rajabaja Science College at Calcutta University. But Mukherjee's educational innovation made the poverty of the British vision of higher education in India even starker. Mukherjee expected the colonial government to match the endowments and increase funding for science and research, and was greatly disappointed to find out that it had no intention of doing this. The English utilitarian view dictated that it runs the university system on the cheap, while the viceroys of India, who also doubled up as chancellors of the university, were happy to engage in high-sounding rhetoric on the importance of higher education and research. When the time came to loosen the purse strings and put their money where the mouth is, they were remarkably reluctant to do so. The same attitude was also discernible when Jamshedji Tata solicited funds from the colonial state to establish Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Tata's project of establishing a genuine research university following the template of Johns Hopkins University in the United States was rebuffed by Lord Curzon. Not only Curzon was reluctant to cough up the funds, he actively pruned its scope of activities, turning it into something more which resembled a technical institute rather than the full-fledged research university that Tata envisaged. Indian Institute of Science, the institution that Tata founded, is an excellent institution. But had Tata been alive today, he would have been the first to admit that it is not the research university that he originally conceptualized. The factor that frustrated Tata and Ashutosh Mukherjee is in fact the same. The utilitarian instrumental viewpoint of the British refused to acknowledge the benefit of having well-funded teaching and research universities in India, given that in Britain there were plenty of those type of institutions. They saw home and colony as parts of the same system. While one can appreciate quite readily why the British did very little to encourage teaching and research in Indian university, the puzzle is the lack of change after independence as far as the mainstream university was concerned. After all, at the dawn of India's independence, the country had a well-educated politician, Nehru, at helm, who appreciated the value of research, science and technology. There were, of course, important educational reform post-independence, but it is crucial to note that they mainly happened outside of the mainstream university system. The reason behind this is complex and multifold. First, after the First World War, education came under the control of indigenous ministers. This arrangement was part of the system of diarchy instituted after the war. The idea was to give some amount of political power to local people, hence some domains, education being one of them, were transferred under the control of native ministers. In reality, diarchy was a mess, which satisfied neither the colonial elite nor the native population. Funding was tightly controlled by the center, and diarchy meant that the central government could divest its interest in the higher education sector of the country. From this point onward, higher education became provincial in nature in India, a situation that continues till date. When India gained its independence in 1947, the provincial nature of the university system in the country severely limited the ability of the central government to usher in reforms that were sorely needed. The second part of the explanation has to do with the ideology that dominated political thinking in India in the years following its independence. To develop the economy on a socialist pattern through centralized planning had been the avowed goal of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. The institution of 5-year plans in India was conceived mainly to put this policy into practice. Nehru, in the decades following the independence, had a similar instrumental view of higher learning in the country as the British, from whom he took over the reins. The goals were different, of course, but the idea that the purpose of higher education system is subservient to a greater cause remained the same. The reforms in the higher education system post-independence need to be seen in this light. The requirements of the policymaker from higher education system were engineers in sufficient numbers, industrial research, and intelligence for economic planning. Rather than depending on the mainstream university system to cater to these needs, the government chose to create new institutions for them. So the IITs and IIMs were created. The former to produce engineers who would operate the public sector-owned basic and heavy industries, and the latter to supply administrators who would manage them. And in reality, we know things turned out differently, but that's a different story. ISI started its life in the colonial era, but ISI, Indian Statistical Institute, started its life in the colonial era, but came into prominence when it became the leading player in the project of developing 5-year plans for India and in the production of national sample surveys. For industrial research, the government opted for a mix of old and new. Existing institutes like IISc were impressed upon to tailor its research to focus on basic and heavy industry. New autonomous research institutions like the National Physical Laboratory were also created under the auspices of CSIR to advance the state of industrial research in the country. In conclusion, it can be said that the defining characteristics of the Indian university system, its examination orientation, its provincial nature, undue influence of politics in its administration, its disintegrated character, have evolved over time through a complex interplay between history and path dependency. History matters. On its own, the statement can be rather facile in the explanatory context. My book attempts to demonstrate how it has mattered in relation to the Indian university system. Path dependency, where the present choices are limited by the decision made in the past, can also be discerned clearly in the evolutionary trajectory of the university system. Indian policymakers at the dawn of independence in 1947 chose not to dismantle the examination-oriented system, the examination-oriented and provincial nature of the system, for reasons that have been discussed in the book. They, however, responded to the development needs of the newly independent nation and came up with creative solutions, such as the institutions of autonomous institutes and research laboratories that resided outside the mainstream university system. Indian policymakers in the present time who are interested in reforming the university system hence have to deal with the consequences of decision made as far back as the days of the Education Dispatch of 1854. The success that ISI has enjoyed, in particular between 1949 and 1964, would not have been possible without Nehru championing its cause through the labyrinth of Indian politics and bureaucracy. On its own, the undoubted brilliance of Mahalanobis, the founder of ISI, would not have been sufficient to propel ISI to national and global prominence. This is illustrative of both the strength and weakness of the Indian higher education system. Politics can be debilitating, but it can also have a salutary impact. Enlightened politicians who appreciate the value of higher learning perhaps represent the best hope for the urgent reform that the sector is in need of. Thank you.